In the last two videos, we saw the move bishop h6 happening with the motivation to gain time for rapid development. It was based on concrete tactics. In this game, things are less brutal but more elegant. Our bishop h6 device is used to prevent black from completing his development, thus keeping the king in the center. This time, the victim is no one less than Aronian. However, as you can see by the game data, he was only 14 or 15 when this encounter happened. e4, c5, the Sicilian defense, d3. This was a specialty of Minasian. Objectively, it is not a very good move. Knight c6, g3. And now the engine says that after knight f6 exclamation mark, bishop g2 d5, black is playing for a small advantage already. In the game, however, there happened d5, the most aggressive move in the style of a young man. Now white should not play knight d2, as after knight f6, bishop g2 e5, the position is slightly better for black due to his space advantage. This is a position reminding us of the King's Indian defense or the modern defense with colors reversed. White's extra tempo doesn't prevent him from standing worse in this position. Now after d5, white has to take on d5. That is the game idea, the game plan Minasian had in mind, and actually it contains a lot of poison. Queen d5, attacking the rook. The queen looks quite impressive on d5, but actually it also is a liability because it is exposed on that square. Knight f3, and now Aronian played the most natural move, and this shows us how dangerous this variation could be for black if he is unprepared. Aronian played bishop g4, the most natural move. But let's first have a look at the better alternative, knight d4. So this move is equalizing. For instance, bishop g2, and now bishop h3 exclamation mark. Bishop takes bishop, knight f3 check, king f1. Of course now white has the threat of bishop g2, but black is to move and place knight e2 check, attacking the rook on h1. Now white could go for draw by repetition, for instance king g1, knight f3 check, king f1, knight e2, and so on and so forth. Or he could play, after knight e2 check, the move king e2. Now we see queen h5 check, king takes d2, a funny position, queen takes h3, and here we can state that things are equal. So let's go back to our game. Knight f3, bishop g4, aggressive, naturally looking. This looks like a normal sound move, but actually after bishop g2, white is slightly better. The thing is that black's kingside, the whole kingside hasn't been developed yet. The king is right now stuck in the center, and the queen on d5 is exposed on the long diagonal. So white has a lot of dynamic qualities here. Of course, by definition he has less space if you only look at the pawn structure, but his dynamic advantage overcompensates that. Now Aronian played knight d4. Let's have a look at the normal move e6. I just want to prove my statement that white is slightly better here. h3, if you now take on f3, you have the white has the two bishops and an advantage on the light squares. That's why it's very easy to claim a slight advantage for white in this position. So the only critical move would be retaining the bishop by playing bishop h5. White would answer castles, the knight f6, and now knight h3. That is much stronger than knight c3 because the queen is not positioned very nicely on d5 anyways. So now the idea is to play knight c4 followed by g4 and then knight fe5 when the bishop g2 unfolds its full potential on the long diagonal. So the queen has to retreat anyways. We don't need to play knight c3, misplacing our knight for this purpose. Now knight c4, rook d8. It's just an exemplary line, right? g4, bishop g6. Now the knight comes to e5, takes. The queen is under attack. Queen c7, queen e2. I have some more moves here, but for the video, let's keep it short. The knight is very actively placed on e5, and the idea is f4, and then even f5 if black is sleeping in this position here. So this is a slight advantage for white. Also look at the strong bishop g2. Now back to the game. Aronian played knight d4, attacking the knight on f3. This knight has to be defended, and now queen e6 check happened. That was the idea of black's setup, misplacing white's king. Now we see white has the problem that the rook right now is out of play because white cannot castle anymore. But even though that this is true, it's a minor theme in this position. There are more relevant topics. So as you can see, black's kingside is not developed yet, and the queenside would be a dangerous place to castle because it's quite open, and the bishop here lays in the ambush. So white can then, or could then, open the queenside with b4 later. So castling queenside really doesn't look right here. So now what happened? The game is knight takes f3. That was a mistake. Let's see what happens after queen d7, c3, getting rid of this annoying knight. Knight c4. It's about the square e5. Let's say e6, h3, bishop h5, g4, unpinning the knight. And now the knight can go to the strong square e5. And actually this is winning for white, as you can see, because now black has to move his king, and then the king will be stuck in the middle. The better move after knight c4 would be f6 in order to prevent white's knight from jumping to that square, and also intending to build up a strong grip in the center by playing e5. However, after knight e3, bishop h3, d4, white is quicker than black, so black cannot play e5 anymore. And you see black's underdeveloped kingside is the problem. White is slightly better in this position. Now let's go back to the game. In the game we saw Aronian taking the knight, but that was a mistake. Knight f3. The threat now would be h3. Please note that the queen on e6, that move was necessary to misplace white's king, stands there very poorly because it is blocking the e-pawn. So, and now h3 would be the threat in order to attack the bishop. So the bishop has to go to h3 before white prevents this. At least black managed to exchange this very strong bishop here on g2. This is white's strongest minor piece, of course. But now, after the next move, white has a clear advantage. The next move is, I would say, the second strongest move of the game. It was the move c4. Imagine white playing d4 instead. After this, black can equalize. C takes d4, knight d4, queen d5. One merit of the move c4 is that it deprives the queen of this square. Now we see a pin in action, so bishop h3 doesn't work because of queen takes h1, right? So f3 has to be played here. Check, takes, castle queenside, attacking the knight. The knight can be defended, e5, attacking the knight again. It is pinned, but white can prevent the loss of a knight by placing the queen on b3, and after queen b3, knight b3, the position is equal. Black has a bit of space advantage in the center and managed to solve the problem with his king. But now after the game move c4, things are different. This move is extremely strong. It grabs some space. It opens the avenue for white's queen to a4. So queen a4 check or queen to b3 later are options now. And also the queen, black's queen, is deprived of the square d5. And also later if you play d4 or b4, which is an idea, that's an idea amongst others, black is unable to keep the position more or less close by playing c4, c5 as the c5 pawn is blocked. Bishop takes g2, king takes g2. Now let's say black plays a move like knight f6, a natural development move. That is bad. After b4, he is on the verge of losing already. This is played in the style of the Bh6 gambit. cb4, queen b3. See how nice this c4 move was? Now we can grab space. If the b4 pawn would fall, there would be a lot of pressure in the b file. I give you some interesting lines here to illustrate that concept. Queen d7, preparing e6, a3. I told you this was very much in the style of the Bh6 gambit. So one line, the better line would be e6, ab, bishop, e7, knight e5, check, and white has a clear advantage here. You can see the knight is pinned right now. White has more space, better development. But if black takes on a3, if black accepts the pawn offer, things are much worse, because after bishop takes a3, white is already winning. It's too late for black now. Let's say b6, in order to diminish the pressure along the b file, bishop b2, e6, and now we see a beautiful queen sacrifice, queen b6, a b6, and white is winning because king e7 doesn't work due to bishop a3 check. So what? After bishop a3, black has to play e6. We just saw b6. Bishop takes bishop, king takes bishop, rook b1. Now the b7 pawn is under attack. b6. Looks like black can solve his problems. Now black needs two moves like g6, king, g7, and everything would be fine. But black is not given any respite here. Queen a3 check, king g8, rook takes b6, and white is winning because the next move will be rook a6 followed by rook takes a7, and then the next target will be the f7 pawn here with some of the major pieces on a7 and the knight coming to e5. That is game over. Let's go back to the game. Here Aronian played queen c6. That was a good move. The queen is pinning the knight. d4 takes, e6, rook d1. b4 might be slightly better, but rook d1 is also a good move. And now the best black move would have been knight e7 with a slight advantage for white. But now black committed a mistake. He played the natural looking move knight f6. So if white now is not playing with full power, black might equalize. For instance, after bishop g5, bishop e7, we see an equal position because black is prepared to castle short. Or let's say white is playing the move b3 in order to develop his bishop along the long diagonal. Also now it is only equal. White would even be losing, surprisingly, after bishop b2, double question mark, g5. Of course, the idea is to play g4 as the knight f3 is pinned. So you see the queen on c6 is placed quite powerfully. Now white has to defend against g4, but black renews the threat. Rook h1. After g4, g4, the h pawn would be pinned, so the rook moves away. Again, g4 is threatening, so white has nothing better than blocking this pawn. h3, rook d8. And now, no matter what white does, let's say queen c3, queen e4, black is winning as this g4 pawn would fall. Or queen takes a7. Now black is winning by knight takes g4. The threat is knight takes f2. And if queen takes f2, g4 with a devastating attack, as the rook g8 would also be included. Or if king takes f2, bishop c5 check with a double attack on queen and king. So after queen a4, that's the best, exchanging queens in order to save white's king. Black can liquidate as follows: knight e3 check, takes, rook d2 check, king g1, takes, rook b2. And now we see a very strong rook on the second rank. So white is completely lost here. So this wouldn't have been good. But now after knight f6, white came up with a hammer, the strongest move of the game. And you might already expect what happens now. It is a move bishop h6. I call it the freezer because it is supposed to freeze black's kingside. The bishop cannot move here as it is tied to the defense of the pawn g7. But if the bishop cannot move, so cannot move the king to safety by castling short. So this move, bishop h6, is our motive. It is extremely powerful. And yeah, I found this game very, very inspiring. Now let's see what happened. The best move maybe would have been now rook g8. Rook g8 is now preparing bishop c5. Let's say bishop g5. Of course, the bishop on h6 is depending on the queen d4, right? And if the queen is supposed to be attacked, the bishop will become very vulnerable on h6. So moving the bishop away makes a lot of sense. Actually, we have already accomplished our mission by playing bishop h6, as now the rook is on g8, black cannot castle short anymore. Bishop e7, the f6 knight was under pressure. b4, threatening b5 in order to expel black's queen from the long diagonal. b6. This position is only slightly better for white. Black's position is still quite tough here. And the queen on the long diagonal, which could now go to b7 after b5, is a part of the equation here. But of course, white has a nice position, and the move bishop h6 definitely was doing his job. In the game, after bishop h6, black played rook c8 question mark, attacking the pawn, but this is simply defended. And now Aronian committed a mistake. He should have maybe played a5, but after b3, white's position is clearly better, as black cannot really develop his kingside. He is frozen right now. Another move would be bishop c5 after bishop to h6. Queen h4, of course, keeping the knight f6 under pressure, otherwise white would lose the bishop. G takes h6. Bishop f8, there is nothing better than moving back. Let me just point out, if, for instance, rook g8, Now white could simply unroot the knight f6. Bishop takes knight, bishop takes pawn, pardon me, rook takes bishop, queen f6. And now white not only has won a pawn, also black's kingside is completely disrupted. So white has an easy win. That is, after queen h4, bishop f8 is forced. Bishop has to go back. Now b4, attacking on the queen side. White wants to use black's underdeveloped state. And of course b5 is the intention in order to unpin the knight here. b6 in order to keep the queen on the diagonal, but now after queen d4, rook g8, bishop d2, bishop e7, queen d3, queen e4, queen b3, white is close to winning. We see the problem here, that is the king. The king cannot be brought into safety. This position would be okay, but this position isn't. We also see ideas like queen a4 check, winning the pawn on a7. Coming back to the game, Aronian played queen e4, that was objectively bad, queen c3. Now let's say what would happen after queen c6. White will play b4, of course grabbing the initiative on the queen side, gaining more space. White wants to open up the position somehow, exploiting the fact that black's king is still in the center. Now let's say bishop takes b4, queen b4 takes, queen c3. Now we see there are problems on the long diagonal, king e7, only move. The knight had to be protected, queen b4 check. Actually we have the same position, with the exception that black cannot castle anymore, as he just moved his king to e7 and back. Now we can play c5, castling is not possible any longer. Knight d5, queen e4, and white's position is won as black lacks coordination of his pieces. The rook is not in play and the king is stuck in the center. After queen c6, b4, we just saw bishop takes b4. Let's see what happens after b5, c5, knight e5, queen e5, f6, check. This position is also lost for black. White has a nice passed pawn, and black has also to fear the move knight d4 in the right moment when the e6 pawn turns out to be very soft. Now in the game there happened queen f5, and that is a bit of a pity, white blundered. After having played a fantastic game, a beautiful concept, white played knight d4. Let's first see what would have been better. Bishop f4. Because now, let's go back half a move. As the queen is protecting the knight, of course, the bishop is under attack. So the bishop should have just moved away. Bishop f4. And now white is winning as black's king is weak, and also the two pawns on the queen side are very vulnerable. For instance, queen e4, pinning the knight again, but now we see white attacking black's queen side. a6 in order to protect the a pawn, rook d4, queen c6, rook to d1, and now of course the threat is rook d8. And if you play bishop d7, pardon me, bishop e7, bishop d6 is very strong. Of course you cannot castle because the bishop would be hanging. But now after bishop d6, rook d6, queen c7, white would win the rook on h8. And that is why black is lost. So what can black play apart from the move a6? He could play bishop e7, but now white would just grab a pawn. Finally black is able to castle, but white has an extra pawn and is winning. Now in the game as I said, Aronian was lucky, at least temporarily, as his opponent blundered. He played knight d4, looks like a normal move, but now allowed the sacrifice queen takes f2. Of course, a young fellow like Aronian is very sharp in terms of tactics and didn't overlook this opportunity. The problem with the entire bishop h6 motive is that, of course, the bishop h6 is depending on the queen applying some pressure on this knight here. Sometimes the queen is on c3, sometimes in other games the queen does it from f3, sometimes the queen does it from h4. But we need the queen to have the bishop stable on h6. But now it's this queen which is removed. King takes f2, knight e4, king e2, knight takes queen, rook takes queen, g takes h6. The position is now equal or unclear. And actually what happened is that the better player at that time, Minasian, he won the game after 54 moves using his better experience. As the game is not relevant anymore, we will call it a day here. I hope you like the freezer motive in combination with the bishop h6 move. And I hope to see you again in our next bishop h6 game.